given that this is a large group, it would be good to then have some breakout groups for maybe 30 to 40 minutes, so that you all kind of can talk in a smaller group, about 4 to 5 people per group, where you can talk amongst yourselves about your responses to the paper, some of the questions and discussion points you have prepared. And after that, we will come back in a plenary session like this, and then each of the groups will have to appoint a person who can provide a summary of the discussion you've had in the group, and we could take it from there. And I'm sure we will fill up the time in that way. So is that a good plan for all of you? Maybe we will have 5 minutes after this, after the breakout group, for to stretch your leg or to get a cup of tea or something. But let's do it that way, right? Okay, so the seminar is entitled Cultural Infrastructures and Institutions Representing Diversity. And Dennis Byrne, the ICS HDR director, has asked me to prepare for this seminar and give you a piece of reading, which is the paper that you have all read. Now, this paper, Unruly Multiculture, was prepared for a handbook of race, ethnicity, and communication, which I was asked to write by the editor of this handbook, Professor Miria Giorgio at the London School of Economics. So the specific brief for this paper was to talk about issues around a very broad brief: multicultural, media, and the arts, and to provide an overview of the issues. So as you have probably noticed, the article is really quite a broad brush rather than going in depth into particular issues. But it did give me an opportunity to really think through some of the issues that I have had really with this buzzword diversity. Diversity is a word that has become increasingly frequently used. And if you look at the Google frequency charts, you can find that really the word diversity is used. So used in discourse, in public discourse, on websites, in books, in articles, newspapers, and so forth, increasingly frequently used from around 1980. But really in the last 10 years or so, diversity has become very much a buzzword in kind of, especially, I think, in Western democracies. It would be interesting to find out from those of you who are not living in a Western society whether the discourse of diversity is as frequently used, and if so, in which way, right? So that's one of the things that we could talk about later. Diversity certainly in the Australian context, in the UK, in the US, Europe, really is a discourse that is generally put forward as something that is, diversity is seen as something that needs to be promoted, that needs to be protected. Diversity is good, right? So that's the idea in mainstream discourse. But it's a benign word, very much like the word democracy. Right? The word democracy is also kind of a term that somehow is evoked to instill a sense amongst those who hear this word as well. This is something good, that democracy is good. So how can you be against democracy, right? So the same is the case with the word diversity. But as with democracy, I would suggest that the word diversity also evokes a lot of problems, a lot of challenges, and it really brings together quite a lot of struggles over issues of identity and belonging, around equality, around social justice, etc. So, in fact, when we talk about diversity, we are really talking about a very contested arena in the society, in the broader society. So there are lots of struggles over diversity, both between societies and within societies. When we talk about between societies, we can think, for example, of the United Nations. Last week at the Olympics, you would have all the nations would have their kind of flag, and each nation would be one item, and you would have there then the diversity of nations, but still unified within that context. Within societies, diversity is also often discussed in terms of within a nation, we have diverse groups, different types of groups of people, different communities, and so on. So diversity really is a term that points to the fact that we live in a world where differences are very much part and parcel of how groups and communities and individuals relate to each other. And we can talk about social diversity, but what I'm talking about here is specifically cultural diversity, and also as in particular diversity in cultural representation. When we talk about social diversity, generally people discuss that in demographic terms, like men and women, or people in different racial ethnic categories, LGBTQI groups, and so on. But cultural diversity in the Australian context in particular is often focused on issues of race and ethnicity, and in relation to migration. Now, in the Australian context, the recognition of diversity, the official recognition of diversity, was in terms of race and ethnicity, was made official, let's say, in the 1970s, when policies of multiculturalism came into effect. The idea was that multicultural policy would provide opportunities for racially and ethnically diverse groups to become part of the nation more than what they have been before. An example is the establishment of SBS, the public broadcasting company, which was established in 1980, and it started really as a multilingual radio network. So the idea was that a lot of migrants could not speak English well, and there was a need to reach these groups. We can see that now in the pandemic as well. There is a need to reach minority, non-English speaking minority groups, and therefore a multilingual media service was required. So that's how SBS started. But of course, since then, it has become a much broader cultural institution. The problem, though, with these kinds of policies is that they still remain quite marginal in the context of the overall society. So progress has been painfully slow in making diversity a recognized part of policy, of governance, of service provision, and so forth. So diversity has remained really very much still quite a marginal issue. The monocultural bias, if you like, is still alive and well. And we have seen that very much in the institutions of the arts and media, which I have described in the paper. Now, one of the issues that is so problematic, I think, in the whole area, both policy area and kind of area of public discourse around diversity, is that it's so almost unproblematically linked to this idea of inclusion. So diversity and inclusion are often used almost at the same time, right? So that diversity policies are often defined in terms of making inclusion possible. And I have described in the paper how that is actually problematic, because one of the problems of inclusion as a concept is that it in fact depends on those in power or on those who are in the dominant group to make inclusion happen, right? So in this sense, inclusion depends on the generosity, if you like, of the powerful group. And as such, inclusion tends not to really change institutions in a radical way, but instead it transforms it through compensatory strategies, and it therefore assists in the self-reproduction and not in the demolition of institutions. So inclusion really doesn't result in radical change. It is reformist in that sense. And what I'm suggesting in the paper is that we actually don't really have a different strategy than inclusion, except for the more radical groups who are working outside institutions, such as Black Lives Matter or Me Too movement, perhaps, but certainly kind of those groups who are focusing on decolonial strategies, where inclusion is no longer the goal, right? But what is the goal remains quite uncertain, and I think that that's really something to be discussed. What is it that such groups ultimately are aiming for? For example, when you want to decolonize the museum, a lot of museum directors are now very much on board with this agenda because they are being forced to. But at the same time, is it a question of maintaining the museum as an institution or completely getting rid of it? I mean, so I think that's a discussion to be had. So in a sense, kind of, we can never really completely move beyond the agenda of inclusion, I think, because the institutions that we have, whether it's museums, but it can also be awards structures, such as the Oscars structures that I have discussed in the paper, or broadcasting institutions, film companies, theater production companies, and so forth. These are institutions out there that have really been in charge of uh, uh, creating the cultural representations of society that we as consumers are provided with. But how can we change that instead? If change is required, how do we make that happen? Now, at the same time, of course, we all know, and that this actually really has become so much more pronounced in the era of social media. The field, the global field of multicultural out there is so expansive now, so huge, so dynamically changing all the time, with all sorts of flows and streams and trends happening that are very difficult to control. That is the area of multicultural that is beyond policy, I would suggest, that is beyond control. The case of BTS that I've given at the end is simply to think through all the issues that are at play here. Of course, BTS as a K-pop phenomenon is very much part of a capitalist, globalized cultural economy. At the same time, they are coming from a country which has not really been part of the dominant cultural sphere globally. And when they become very popular in countries such as the United States, but also Australia, what is going on there? And you know, we can see a lot of trends and a lot of different opinions really kind of converging and contesting the very phenomenon at stake, without really coming to a certain conclusion one way or the other, right? So my conclusion really is that the question is multicultural and the recognition of diversity ever going to be something that we can have proper policies for, or is it more a kind of, if diversity a de facto, flexible, fluid, heterogeneous, and volatile field of cultural production and consumption, where kind of it becomes increasingly unclear who is and who is not mainstream, and where it is also quite clear that the cultural wars occurring in that field of multicultural will be happening on an ongoing basis. So is there a stalemate here? That is my big sociological question. That's my question, but I could imagine that you all would have quite different questions after having read this. I'm very curious, for example, to find out later from you to which extent some of the issues that I have discussed in this paper provide some insights for your own research, whether or not this is kind of relevant, because I'm sure for some of you it might not be relevant. So that's the reason why I ended with the BTS case, because I thought it's actually kind of an interesting case, but also kind of really quite unclear how we should actually evaluate a case like that. So I would very much like now to have you in how many groups? What do you think? 3 or 4? 4? 4 groups? Okay, Jan, would you like to? So I would suggest, should we come back at around 3? At 3 o'clock? Okay. I am not going to join any of you. So, okay. Yeah. Oh.
I'm going to discuss
Yeah.
with them because I read all your documents.
Of course, you should. You should.
See you later. Bye.
See you later. Yeah. Okay. Aha. I suggest that we have a few minutes pause in case you would like to have some, cup of tea or water or something. So. Well, welcome back to everyone. I've just said to the first came back, we can have maybe 2-3 minutes to give you a chance to get something to drink or go to the toilet or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can pass the time. Sally, I'm curious, what kind of PhD are you doing?
Well, Ian, I came out of the university really feeling quite despondent about the way in which behaviour in terms of bullying cultures and what have you. I think I spoke to you many years about a bullying culture once.
Yeah.
Well, I think it really did get worse. And so I'm looking at civility.
Oh.
And I'm actually working with Deborah Stevenson and Suzanne Gannon. And I'm just interested in that whole kind of notion of the neoliberal university and how the policies even possibly don't help any of this stuff. I'm interested in analysing it just to see, what's going on. So I'm using music as an example, but both within the industry and within the university.
There's a lot of bullying going on, and it's getting worse, is what you're saying.
It is. I mean, Sony Music and all of those other, they've been in the news just recently, and it's rife I think in the industry. I think it's sort of tied up with gender and a whole lot of other these issues around ethnicity and race as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sally, did you say music? I just was out of the room. How, in what respect? Because I sort of work in this field.
Music. You work in music, do you?
Well, I'm at the Marx Institute for Brain Behaviour and Development.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
And
hi.
So I'm really interested in cultural infrastructure policy and how we can be genuinely inclusive, not just token, just genuinely. And to do it, I've proposed the argument that we have to have music theory that can actually, that has the capacity to do that. So that's why I proposed mathematical music theory and visualizing the invisible, because music is intrinsically hierarchical and it's invisible. And until you visualize it, you can't really see those hierarchies. And when you do this for music all over the world, you can see that cultures have things in common, things that are different, and you can track the DNA of musicians traveling across the globe. It's very important to do this. There's been a recent study about these little prime ratios of rhythms, but there are also smaller prime ratios then of the metric structure as a hierarchical metric structure. So I work in the field of meter, and I'm trying to convince everyone, I suppose, that we really do need to be studying meter and rhythm, not just rhythm. So,
well, I mean that's an interesting point, but I also wonder whether you've come across Phil Ewell, who Oh, you know his stuff, right?
Yeah, spoken to him. Yeah.
And I mean, that Black Lives, off the back of the Black Lives Matter movement, he really got stuck into music theory.
Yes.
I think in a really interesting way, to be really honest.
It is, because it's the way, you know, without people didn't know, but they walked into a country like Nigeria and imposed notation-based music theory on music that has never been notated.
Yeah.
So it's oversimplified, misunderstood, became extinct, which is the urgency here. They're losing people's cultural heritage. We have to stop. This has to stop.
So basically what you're saying is that that's actually a form of musical colonialism or
Exactly.
imperialism. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. So we have to take this really seriously, because it's identity and oppression.
And appropriation as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Right.
do something.
Has everyone come back now or not yet? Maybe not, a few not yet. Well, maybe we should start. So I propose that each of the groups will present briefly what they have been discussing and some of the issues that they might like to put forward. And we'll take it from there, okay? So group one.
Do we have group numbers?
Yeah, but I have a list of group numbers. Anyway, I don't know. Who would like to start? If not, this is group one. It's Boya, Gina, Rakesh, and Yinghua. Gina?
Okay, I can start.
Oh, Boya. Okay. Yeah.
So we basically talked about, because this article is based on a white dominant country mainly, and there is actually more issues happening, for example, in Hong Kong, where I live, which is a place actually not white dominant, but like actually Chinese dominant, and used to govern by British people. But there is still lots of racism things happening at the moment. For example, if you take the train, you can see lots of people, they try to avoid people who is colored, sorry. Like they don't want to sit next to people who is from Philippines, who is like a domestic worker in Hong Kong. On the other hand, they might be very, when they see a white British people, they will be very like, oh, you're from Britain, like that. So there is a very, so the society is actually structured in very deeply racism. We also think because the society is already in a situation which has had lots of racism happening in the society, and it's actually very hard to change people's mind in one go. So whether this culture policy change will actually change the behavior of the racism in the society, we're still questioning that. That's a brief summary. Gina, do you have any other comment?
I'm sad. I'm from the Philippines.
Yeah.
Anyway, our group really has a lot of issues with this concept of diversity, inclusion, and multiculturalism. Mostly, it's being done in the context of just having people, like diversity quota, or just to have that sort of diverse population in a group. For example, in a company, like Rakesh was sharing based on his experience, and also with as Boya said, on white, predominantly white societies, like in the US, in Canada, in Australia, and even in the UK, as Ian was saying in her paper. What struck us most based on the sharing of the group was that, of course, these issues are deeply troublesome. It's deeply problematic because diversity and inclusion are just happening when, as Ian mentioned, Sarah Ahmed, in the paper, when the people to be included are not troublesome. If these people can be are able to adapt to that white, predominantly white culture, whether it's in the arts, it can be in the company, etc., when they don't cause trouble. So Jan mentioned a very interesting case of a Syrian refugee, traveling by boat or by ship to Australia. And later on, he just found that, he was able to settle his life in Australia, only to find out that his requirements, he doesn't meet the requirements of Australia for migration because of his background in Syria, which is deemed as, as enclosing certain stereotypes of a deeply problematic society. So it gives us questions on, which kind of people are really included and who's setting the rules of inclusion in the first place, in the level of policy, of state policies, for example, down to the level of, corporate policies, art policies, etc. Another, I think, interesting thought was that those who are being included are largely, being included because they are known, for example, in white circles. I mean, I remember this controversy on Parasite winning the best, I think, was that best film or best film director?
Yeah, he won the Oscar last year.
Yeah. So there was a lot of rumors around the circles of these film directors that if the director was not well known in the white film industry, he might not have made it. And that's really something problematic. There could be some standards of how that film was rated as best, but at the same time, if you are not very well known in the industry by the gatekeepers, then that's really something problematic. So lastly, we cannot really isolate the issue of multiculturalism in the arts with that issue of racism, because up to now, even though the US, for example, has been struggling for, like, I don't know, a century or 50 years with regards to inclusion and diversity, and yet things like George Floyd, the likes of George Floyd are still being killed, and women and other kinds of identities are still being questioned whenever they're trying to lift their lives into society. It's something still that is at the very superficial level, and we really need genuine policies here at all levels to really change this scenario. And that's why we were not able to discuss this thoroughly, but Ian's provocative question on the kinds of alternatives, whether we should smash museums and all that. I mean, I mentioned, for example, that there are museums, I don't know if Jewish museums, for example, in certain countries, I mean, they can be problematic, but at the same time, they are trying to say something about, formerly marginalized groups, the plight that they had during the time that they were being prosecuted, etc. So there could be ways on that, but currently these issues are still needing a lot of deep introspection. At the same time, a lot of radical, I think, alternatives to really stop seeing heterogeneity as something troublesome and something that should be removed just for the sake of inclusion. So I think it's deeply problematic that it's and it's paradoxical in the sense that you want diverse people, but that when you include those diverse people, you want to eliminate the heterogeneity because that's troublesome, and that's because we are so used to living with stereotypes, as Boya was saying earlier. Thank you.
Thanks for that. So I think that there are some of the issues, kind of like first of all, the issue of how does diversity pan out, and how does it work in non-white societies such as Hong Kong. I think it's a very interesting case, but we can talk about many other countries as well. Then there is the question of, when we talk about inclusion, who is going to be included, kind of the role of gatekeepers. I think that's quite an interesting perspective, actually, to think about that. And then there is the issue of discrimination that is still so rife, despite many decades of policies to ostensibly eradicate discrimination. The deeply contradictory nature of policies of multiculturalism and diverse inclusion. So those are some of the issues that you have brought up. So we can put that kind of on our list. But I think maybe we can go to group 2 now. And on my list, the group 2 is Andrea, Karen, Linda, who is that? Well, I still forgot your name, YX, and Zoe.
Yen.
Yen, okay. Yen and Zoe. So who of that group would like to make the presentation?
Zoe, I think you were articulate. I've already said enough.
Zoe.
I hadn't taken notes while we were speaking, so I apologize if the summary is a bit disjointed. Andrea kind of introduced some of the ideas that she brought to our discussion around, I guess, what inclusion looks like in particular fields, whether it's like moving beyond kind of representation and into kind of like a substantive understanding of or like a methods-based approach, I guess. I'm not sure if I'm summarizing that well, but sort of taking a disciplinary approach, like looking at music theory and understanding diversity and different cultural expressions of music, like on their own terms with their own methods, rather than applying kind of a colonial or Western lens to other cultural. Is that right, Andrea? I'm sorry if I've bungled that. Okay, and then Karen, who is looking at, you know, very much a topic in this sphere. She was talking about kind of the ways in which inclusion is spoken about as like having a seat at a table, and that one way of thinking about moving beyond diversity as kind of lip service is about thinking of like having one's own table. And that in that sense, you know, and with the example of the Jewish Museum, having a model of interaction rather than integration. So, you know, many institutions become permissible, many museums, many, you know, different sort of like own forms become part of an equation rather than, yeah, some kind of sharing of one resource or one institution, which I think is very interesting. And Karen's in Canada and I'm Canadian, and Karen studied multicultural policy, you know, educational policy. And so that I sort of came to our table with that discussion, because while I don't study anything kind of, I'm looking at automation. I was raised as a kind of young Canadian in the 90s with this like huge kind of intense focus on multicultural policy within schools. And so that sort of led us into a discussion around, you know, integration being the sort of flip side of diversity in a migration context. And so Canada having this mosaic approach, which stands a little bit in contrast to the American, I guess, model of the melting pot, but in reality, how those things actually operate, you know, this space in which, you know, they operate can be very much the same. And that's in the sense of thinking about I guess, discourses of multiculturalism and diversity as instruments of power and control and oppression of different groups. And so that brought us to another discussion also about gatekeeping, of course, not just who includes or who is included, but what particular forms and expressions become permissible within that space. So it's not just that you as a, let's say, I'll use my own example, like a Polish Canadian is allowed to sort of like become part of Canadian society, but rather like it's your food and your dance and your kind of the sensual qualities of your culture that become acceptable and integrated. But let's say your inclusion within labor markets are not necessarily, given the same weight. And so Ien is looking at exhibits, Chinese national exhibits within the Art Gallery of New South Wales. And so that was very much, I think that project in a way sums up a lot of what we talked about, what we're interested in. It's, on what terms do those exhibits become acceptable and are accepted, and sort of what work do they do within a kind of historically white institution like the Art Gallery of New South Wales. So I think we very much covered a lot of what was spoken about in the first panel. And we thought it was really interesting. I think Karen came closest to kind of giving us a kind of framework to actually talk about, moving or resolving this question, Ien, of what you asked, which is like, are we at an impasse? And Karen, I think, possibly suggested we didn't have to be, which I really appreciated. And that's where I'll leave our summary.
It's all very interesting, very good summary, I'm sure, Zoe, unless some of the other members of this group would like to add anything. But I thought, this whole issue about, yes, inclusion can be described as gaining a seat at the table, but the other question, the alternative could be to have your own table. The question is, are you still in the same room? And if that's the case, what is that room? Do we still, the question is, of course, we live all in one world. So often you have this notion of unity in diversity, or diversity in unity, that kind of thing. So that's actually almost like a sleight of hand, I think, in terms of how you actually can evade that question of how diversity can actually always also problematize any type of unity. And is it always, kind of how do you create unity in diversity in any stable sense? I'm quite dubious about the possibility of this, but perhaps that's also one reason why all these issues continue to create so much energy as well as trouble. So harmony is extremely difficult to achieve in that sense.
I would like to add one thing to our group. Zoe mentioned the approach that I'm taking is a method. Actually, not meaning to, I just want to clarify that it is actually a process through which to understand very broadly the music of all people. It is a means to that unity, which and I have seen this work. I've analyzed music through these materials, through using mathematics, and I know it works, but I don't want anyone to think that it's like a white colonial woman coming in saying, it's a funny situation to be in, because I have the respect of scholars in Nigeria who are looking for solutions, and they respect this idea because mathematics is for everyone. But that doesn't mean to say you just homogenize it and ignore the cultural context, because a piece of music might be, the whole ceremony, as well as what's happening rhythmically, metrically, pitch-wise. And so, thank you. There are then kind of practices that, to get it right, to be accurate, you do have certain rules, but they're not rules that are so set in stone that it is a method. It's just a process, and it's based on listening. It's psycholinguistic.
So I guess, just before we started this session, we were talking about kind of musical colonialism. In a way, kind of more broadly, I think we can talk about knowledge colonialism. So, the way in which forms of knowledge and processes of knowledge production are universalized at the expense of particular groups and cultures that are not necessarily able to be put within that context. So kind of the issues of discrimination, of colonialism, imperialism can take place at quite subtle ways. Yes. Okay. How about group 3, which is Anya, Doug, Justin, and Vanika? Who would like to say something from this group?
I guess I can start.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. That's great.
And then hopefully the team can jump in, because we kind of, we spoke about different aspects on how we see diversity and inclusion from a research perspective, from a professional perspective, and also lived experience and advocacy. So we kind of just got into the conversation and discussed where we all fit, I guess, in our area of interest, but also in our profession. And so what Veronica did touch base on her research that she's conducting at the moment, and has some element of diversity and inclusion and the community that she's looking at. So I'll probably let her build into that first. But we were talking about diversity and inclusion from a professional background too. In SAM, I work in the diversity and inclusion space, and we talked about some of the way that institutionalized has impacted this concept of diversity, and how it can be a marketable concept, in a sense that a lot of organizations or companies use it just to really tick that box within their own organizations. And so it has lost a bit of meaning, and it lost a bit of touch in what direction we are leading toward. And it will also depend on those who are in a position of power to really talk about diversity, or to really make policies that has an inclusivity outcome to it as well. So maybe working in the community development sector and from an advocacy, and also with someone who has a lived experience, I understand that the concept itself, it's very hard, particularly when often the people who are presenting these training, for example, diversity and inclusion, don't have a lived experience, and also really approach it from an outcome that it has more marketing perspective, and then everyone is not being given a voice from that. The other part that I had mentioned to the team at the end, I said, we're not going anywhere right now with the concept of diversity and inclusion. And I think everyone needs to play a role in it. That will include that we all need to be reflective of who we are as an individual, because it's not going to change the behavior that we hold, but it has to change the attitude. And so anyone who's the space of diversity and inclusion need to reflect on their position and the power that they hold. And one of the example that I did give was that even for me as a young Black woman, from a former migrant background or a refugee, I also have to reflect on my positionality, that I will have a certain power over certain communities and my own families, which give me that element of of position where I can speak up and I can advocate for other, and not everyone can have that position. So therefore, in terms of diversity and inclusion as well, I have a voice and I have a platform. And so that was one of the perspective that I had highlight, but the team can help me out.
Yes, please. Can anyone add whatever is discussed in your group?
Yeah. So Anya brings up the interesting point of who gets to speak, which we thought was a critical thread, and we discussed it in various ways, including, I mean, if you start from the individual, one could argue that everyone is diverse, just purely based on unique lived experiences. But then how do you begin to integrate voices of separate communities at a political level, and how do you scale up the idea of diversity or scale it down? Because you could keep taking that lens and go down to 100 people and you'd still find a diversity of power, a diversity of experience. And how does one homogenize the idea of diversity? Because it depends on the context that you're working from. So we're talking about, like, for example, in South Asia, social hierarchies are far more entrenched and acceptable. So who gets to speak in a city in Nepal, for example? Like who's making decisions at the community level? And especially in majoritarian politics and majoritarian cities or majoritarian policy, often the voices of marginalized communities are completely lost, and they will never get a seat at the table simply because they're not even recognized as requiring a seat at the table, because the majority, it comes back to the idea of democracy then eventually becoming problematic, and who gets to speak. So that was one of the things that we discussed. And we, unlike Karen and the second group, we did not have a very positive idea of whether institutions could in fact be changed. We took a fairly dire approach to whether the museum could actually be decolonized. I think we left with a question mark on that. We're not sure it can, because fundamentally the museum is a colonizing and a colonist artifact, and to dismantle something which is at its core meant as a colonial display of power, how to decolonize it is a question that we think cannot be answered by a single museum, because institutionally that doesn't shift what museums do across the world. But I think the answers that the other groups have given are interesting and juxtapose different opinions to that. So definitely something to think about. Over to Doug and Justin.
Yeah. What about Doug or Justin?
I think you covered the main points there. I think another thing we focused on was the importance of diversity programs, having people with lived experience sort of running them rather than sort of top-down approaches, but also looking out for, the risk of people becoming co-opted into the system, into the institutional hierarchies, and then becoming someone who loses touch with that lived experience. So there were two more points we talked about.
That's great. Yeah. Doug, would you like to add?
Yeah, I think we also just added on that point that law diversity and inclusion has become a compliance measure as well. So
yeah,
it's become such a big business, diversity and inclusion as well. And a lot of what's being sold is this idea of the business case for diversity, which then actually probably creates more exclusion than inclusion in many ways. And I sort of shared an example what we see, even like well-intentioned organizations, advocacy organizations, that you still see the same structures in place. And so the person with lived experience is looked at as lesser than the others there. So there was a recent example where a diversity organization who does some good work in this space, they had a talk where they had someone with the lived experience from lockdowns in Melbourne and talking about it from living within there. And then at the same time, they had the white academic to then provide the context there to go, oh, this is the way it is, and provide that professional context. And so regularly we see that, and even just in small things where they say, all right, we've got these speakers, and there's another organization who said, we've got this talk on, and it's a PwC and a multicultural organization. We're going to have this talk. And the three main speakers, so there's 5 speakers. The 3 people at the top were from the PwC, were all white people. They're at the top. And the 2 people of color were down the bottom, the lived experience. So there's a real challenge there that we don't value lived experience as much as we should. And there's almost, it creates this sort of a ceiling of what people with a lived experience can do. And that then also results in that person becoming a storyteller who can only do it within certain conditions and contexts. And so even when it comes down to the editing of the story, the production of it, all those sort of parts, it ends up being, whose story is it? Who's telling that story? Even as a researcher, as a white man doing research where I'm looking at the experiences of people sharing their, refugee people sharing their stories, every single time I have to keep on looking into that and going, am I the right person for this? And it's a constant challenge because I don't want to be saying that I'm the voice, and there's already power dynamics within the university system and PhDs in particular, that my name is the one on the PhD, while the people that I am researching, often be left aside. And what we do go, here's my PhD, which doesn't become any useful for the people that you're actually doing the research for. So it's a constant challenge if you genuinely want diversity and inclusion and the lived experience fully valued.
Yeah, that points to some intrinsic contradictions and extremely difficult to manage. And then the whole issue that was mentioned in this group about diversity becoming a marketable concept, that's definitely the case, because big business is very much a proponent of diversity for economic benefit. And that, I think, in itself poses enormous challenges. Okay, the last group is Kate, Michelle, Sally, and Charlie.
Yeah, so I'm going to try and sum up, and then obviously the others should jump in as well. I guess, we grappled with the same sorts of things as the other groups. And I think, Ian, what we all felt was that your article raises really interesting questions, and our minds automatically want to jump to an answer, because you want to fix it, right? Like you want to make this better. But obviously it is unruly and it's really messy. So yeah, we talked, I guess, a bit, as some of the other groups did, about the discourses around multiculturalism, because we talked about the sort of critiques that you make in this article, and that, that there's real value in this coming from the academic sphere, but also how do we translate that into what happens in the real world as such, outside of higher education, whether that's translating into policy or education further down. We talked a bit about language and the way that the terms that we use do evolve and change. So when diversity and inclusion became buzzwords, they were probably better alternatives to what had been used previously. But there's always this ongoing critique. So I mentioned, for example, with Ghassan Haj's work around tolerance, which is, that's a long time ago now, and yet we still are facing the same issues, but under different guises, which I think is what your article sort of gets at. Mm-hmm. And I guess in talking about those different discourses and that idea of multiculturalism, like the celebration and the tokenistic sort of stuff that other groups have touched on, and Zhao sort of brought up about, it's easy to look at that celebratory, like looking at what's beautiful or appealing about diversity, but there's much harder work to be done looking at the struggles and the tensions that are also at play in that space. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So then we talked, I guess about a few different possibilities, whether within higher education, if what needs to happen is for it to be dismantled in terms of, getting rid of the hierarchy and then rehiring to try and allow for more diversity, genuine diversity, because we did talk about this reproduction that happens in universities. And also, I guess thinking about how our own research contributes to that sort of reproduction, even when we're thinking about, the teaching that we do, the content that we include in courses, whether it's the theorists that we draw on, who tend to be all, dead white men, and sort of looking at that sort of reproduction that happens. We did also talk a bit about the social media platforms, and whilst perhaps those are spaces that are less subject to the sorts of policies and things like that, so they maybe offer opportunities for more genuine inclusion, that's also problematic. Michelle brought up about that story that came out recently about on TikTok, that Black content creators were saying that the algorithm actually is excluding them, the way that it works. And we also talked about, the use of social media by far right and racist groups and things like that. So, and also whether online remains a marginal kind of group. So even though people might gain some power or sort of exposure in that forum, whether that really translates to actual power within society. So we sort of just talked through some of the issues around social media in that sense as well, and online presence. Do other people from the group want to jump in with the things that I forgot to mention?
Can I just add a little bit?
Yes,
please.
So I kind of been very interested in this multicultural and diversity and inclusion, just as Kate just mentioned. Like, well, I think the issue I brought in is the diversity and inclusion. These terms are very complicated concepts, so it has different layers. But I think as our researcher, we got to have some critiques on these terms. So the critique I brought in is like diversity and inclusion is kind of make something invisible, and the invisible thing is the tension and the struggle in between of these majority or dominant and these marginalized people. So when we are talking about, I love these examples like the tables and the seats. So maybe we would like to ask ourselves some questions, just like for example, as a young Black woman and a people from Philippines, or like myself from China, and when we want to ask ourselves, just like, why would us to gain a seat on the table? It is because we are invisible, right? Our voice couldn't be heard, right? So if what's the point to find another table if another table couldn't be seen? Right? It's invisible, right? So actually we are talking about the seat and the table, we are talking about different standard. So, and the question was to who owns the standard and who creates the standards. And if we try to create another standard, so can we make ourselves acknowledgeable? And if we can't make ourselves acknowledgeable, what could we do? Right? So then I bring up another way, just from my background, from my research background, is like language teaching. So it's about, we are offering these marginalized group, we are offering something for these dominant power people to learn from. You can learn from these marginalized, from these museum, these Aboriginal people. They offer a different, unique way for you to see others, to see the world differently. So, yeah.
So the question then is whether you will be listened to.
Yes, you will be listened and you will be
Listening
acknowledged.
is important.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you speak in the void in a way. Yeah. So thank you for all your presentations so far. Seems like a lot of issues have been put forward, actually fleshing out the complexities around these issues, I guess. No wonder that there are no solutions, really. So, yes, please. Any kind of comments from any of you further? Thoughts?
I think there are solutions though. I mean, you were just saying there before about someone was saying employing people with experience in these areas.
The importance of lived experience, yeah.
Yes, and make visible people, give people opportunity who would traditionally not have any voice whatsoever. Be surprising. I think that the answers are, drawing on all of these threads, pulling them all together, and accepting that there will always be disagreement and there will be threads that never come together. But you always try for the ideal. And I think that is giving people opportunity who don't have that chance. Break those systemic racist issues, that processes that are causing division. It's the invisible infrastructures that we need to address. We need to identify them and gently tease them out and implement there and improve how person-to-person relations occur.
Can I just hop in there, Ian?
Yes.
I'd just like to say that one of the things that was really striking in the music program at Western Sydney University is that it was basically and is still predominantly run by white male academics with the odd tokenistic woman thrown in, but of white Anglo background. And what is really interesting is over that period of time of when the program started in the early 90s, the student cohort has changed radically. The student cohort really represents, in a really broad brush, the real diversity that exists, to use that word, out there in Greater Western Sydney. It was not until 2018-19 that we had the opportunity to hire someone into the program. And we were lucky enough to be able to hire someone who was a migrant of another, background, one that aligned really with the student cohort. And what that's really done, just to see, it was just so stark. It was so amazing to see the transformation of the program, of the students in the program when this person arrived and started to work with the students. It was just so amazing. And so I guess why I'm saying that is that it, to my mind, it's a no-brainer. This has to happen somehow in our institutions. We need to make way for, so that we're not always, we're not always hiring according to the unconscious bias, of people who are like us, but really, truly seeking out difference in that sense. But that's an ideal as well, I guess.
Well, the example you're giving is actually quite interesting. That it makes me think that, well, because I was critiquing this notion of inclusion, because I was wondering inclusion into what? And obviously, in your example of the music program at Western Sydney University, somebody was included but it looks like that that person who was included was also given the opportunity or the power to change the program, which I think, so inclusion, this is what you can do with inclusion in some ways, that through inclusion, you actually produce change if you empower those who are included. But if you just include for the purposes, well, for tokenistic purposes, which is often the case, then of course, you get a completely different effect. So this does bring us to, I think, the importance of really looking at these cases one by one. It's ethnographically quite specific. So that's in terms of research. You can't really make broad brush conclusions about the pros and cons of inclusion. And I think many of you in your groups have actually really specified that when it comes to inclusion, the question is who gets included, who does the inclusion, on what terms. Once the inclusion has taken place, what kind of changes are then made possible and made actually kind of not just made possible, but also accepted by those in power. So yeah, it's very much kind of like, I think, a processual situation. Yeah, very interesting.
Can I add something to Xiao Li? Yeah, what she said about the table, to let the dominant to hear the minority's voice. I just want to add something because it's quite, I find it's quite interesting during the pandemic period, because you can see it doesn't, one part is the vaccination rates. There is a map on the website of New South Wales, Health. You can see the map. From the map, you can see it's different locations, but some different, some locations as most of the locations are like for different ethical background people living there, and you can see very clearly the vaccination rates, which part is very high, which part is very low, and I think it's quite. And you can see the Facebook, the New South Wales government health department use the Facebook. They use many different languages to ask different people, different background people to go to vaccination. So I think, like Shelley said, we make our voice to be heard. Why it's important? I think it appears quite important now during this pandemic period. Maybe we can't hear the voice from the minorities before because it's quite peaceful time, which but now everything has changed. The government, they realized that they should get in touch with those minorities. It's quite important, right, for the government, for the country to deal with this pandemic. Yeah, that's my point. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Can I?
Yeah, Shelley. Yes.
I'm sorry, Karen. I can see Karen is raising her.
Yeah. After it's Karen.
Yeah. Okay. So I remember even now or at the beginning of this pandemic, this Asian phase, or particular for Chinese people, we are having some kind of attack. Some people are being attacked because of this virus, because they believe I think the theory of these people, I believe that Asian people carrying this virus and would transfer this to others, right? So there are many news just reported so people it's just in Australia, in UK, in the United States, and the people are just like, go back to your country, right? And then the people claim I was born here. So I think when Ien just raised this question is first is Australia is a country of home. So Australia is the country of the native English speakers, or Australia is the country of all Australian citizens. So I think this is for one thing is like this, just like for these minority groups, like no matter if you come from Philippines or China or India or so, and the I think this is the point. And another thing I want to point out is like when we are talking about these inclusion, and when I'm talking about inclusion to what, I think we may want to notice that inclusion of these colored people or inclusion of the Aboriginal people is not the same thing as inclusion of the ideology. Just I will give you an kind of example is like when I was a visiting scholar and I went to a university and there's a professor. So who is going to, he's another visiting scholar who is going to give the speech. He came from China, and another Chinese heritage professor works in the university abroad, and she's gonna. We were discussing about the presentation, and she said, "Oh, a Chinese scholar, what can he offer?" So she is a Chinese heritage professor, and she is challenging. So, what knowledge can a Chinese professor offer? So which means she's inside, she's reproducing this kind of hierarchy thing. So which means this, so include this, well, colored people, Aboriginal people, it's not the same thing like the inclusion. Even inclusion, this concept is going to be critique, right?
Right, okay, thank you. We're almost running out of time, but Karen, I think you should really make your point.
Yeah, thank you. It just got me thinking that inclusion, I think based on what you said a while ago about the agency, like what kind of inclusion, what role do you have, right? And I'm thinking inclusion, it's contingent on how diversity is framed, because if diversity is framed as a problem, then multiculturalism is not going to fix it. Multiculturalism becomes a tool that manages and contains it and regulates it because it's a problem to be fixed, right? And if diversity is framed as a good, as a commodity, then you become objectified. Then you become the token person at the table. Then you don't want to be at the table. But if diversity is a recognition of the lived experience of a reality that's material, that's tangible, then maybe agency, recognition as human, that you have agency, not an object, you're a subject who can have a seat at the table and make decisions, in an agentic way. Then maybe inclusion, like let's qualify what inclusion is based on what we think diversity is.
Right? Yeah, so I think that these are very tricky issues. And obviously we can't resolve the issues at all during this session, but at least perhaps we have managed to clarify some of the complexities and the multidimensional issues and challenges that are involved here. I mean, in terms of what you were saying at the end, Karen, I'm starting to think about what I said at the very beginning about democracy. Democracy is a particular system, and certainly not very perfect at all, but as some people say, it's still the least bad system we might have. Same perhaps with diversity and inclusion. Inclusion is absolutely not a perfect solution to the problems of difference, but it might still be one of the few things we have as a kind of political goal, even though that goal can always lead to new problems and new challenges, which then have to be addressed down the road. And that's why I think we are really kind of never going to resolve these issues entirely, but that's perhaps life, that's society. So it does mean that we don't need to feel depressed about it. That's basically how societies operate, and in a way, kind of, you could say that the fact that inclusion and diversity are now definitely on the agenda is in some way progress compared to a situation where difference and diversity was completely denied and suppressed. So in that sense, we can still think in terms of gradual change, not even to say progress. Yeah, so thanks very much, everyone. That was great to hear from all of you and to have this discussion. A great opportunity to reflect on some important and difficult issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.